Like it looks like another nose is growing.
I look washed out and yellow because all I have is this lighting. We're professionals.
All you have is jaundice.
I'm and I'm jaundice. I mean John.
I'm John T, that's John, and this is Digital DM, and today we're talking about Session Zero.
Session Zero, what is it? Why do you need it? And we have 6 points here for you to help think about things to do as you prepare for your Session Zero. So number 1, before we actually talk about Session Zero, I guess we should talk about pre-Session Zero. We like to break things down here on Digital DM.
Well, this is the thing, right? We're going to cover pre-Session Zero, and then the next point is the pre-Session Zero. It just keeps going forward and forward and forward. So Session Zero, and what we mean by Session Zero, because a lot of people don't use them, and I really think people should. So just as a quick rundown of Session Zero, this should be your first meetup of all of your players and your DM together at the regular time that you're going to be playing, but you don't actually start the campaign. You're going to be going over some tips. You're going to be over some character creation, some expectations of both the DM and the players, but I still don't think you should be going into that cold, and that's what we mean by pre-Session Zero.
Right, exactly. I know that I'm actually currently working with some friends of mine to form a campaign that we might play in person, might play online, maybe a little bit of both. Ooh. But I'm already sending messages to them back and forth through text and Discord individually, and getting ideas about races and classes, and making sure that we have a nice combination so that they could start thinking about that character creation process. They have an idea of a backstory and all that stuff even before we meet for that Session Zero. So getting everyone kind of on the same page, kind of a big deal even before Session Zero.
And I think that before we meet point is the important bit, because I think a lot of this sort of pre-stuff should really be happening probably one-to-one, phone call, a WhatsApp message or whatever. Have your players have a bit of an idea of what they're coming in with, even if it is just like race and class. A little bit of backstory might be nice. A lot of these things need to be quite fluid, and even though we're kind of putting these into sort of set points, a lot of these are going to tie into each other, right? Because the whole point of D&D is that everything sort of influences everything else. It's not just a case of the DM sits down and tells the players what to do. You know, the players are going to be affecting everything, and the world is going to be affecting the players. So, giving them a bit of an idea of backstory would be great, but until they really have a full idea of what the style and the setting of the campaign is, which is something we're going to talk about a little bit later, don't get them to be writing a full essay about their character with major plot points or whatever, because it might just physically not work in your world, and also it might not work with the other players as well.
And I know we're going to talk about it later, the setting of the campaign, but if you are planning to do something kind of out of the box, something that 5e wasn't originally designed to do, for example, something like a low magic campaign that might require outside modules, or you might limit the type of classes that you're going to offer to your players, that's definitely something that you want them to know before they all sit down and start planning out characters. So even though we're getting into it later, if you know for a fact you're going to do something wacky, you need to let them know as soon as possible.
In my Thursday game at the minute, I use my own homebrew world, which is Astan, and it's as far as races and classes go, it's really based similar onto the Warcraft world. In as much as there is the human city, there is the elven city, etc., etc.
Right.
And I didn't do that, and somebody came to me with a fantastic filled out backstory for a Loxodon,
which are super cool.
They're great, but I had just not planned for Loxodons to be in the world of Ashtan. I'd planned for it to be very sort of classic sort of genres, and now Loxodons are there. So at the moment, where Loxodons came from and what their place is in the world is still very fluid, because I'm kind of working with my player to come up with it, but to stop that happening,
right?
Any sort of major over arcs there that are going to influence the sort of stuff they're going to be picking, then is the time to do it.
So what you're saying is, when I play an Ashtan, I can be a Loxodon.
Now you can, yes.
Yes, someone pioneered. Number 2, then. One of the big things, and I guess this is more for newer players especially, but also if this maybe is your first time playing online, one of the things you're going to want to get a handle on at a Session Zero are the mechanics, especially the online portion if you're going to be using some software that you've never used before. I know, Jonty, you did this recently with your group.
Yeah, I think it's a really important one to do, especially with digital play, but this also applies to in real life play as well. One of my big problems with D&D, in fact, my only real big problem is D&D, is that it's incredibly front heavy when it comes to the amount of work that your players have to put in. If somebody comes up to you and says, I'd love to try that D&D. Oh, great, yeah, I'll DM. We can totally get into D&D. It's super easy. You just have to turn up and have fun. But first of all, you need a 2-page backstory that's in 12-point font with double spaces. You need to have a character set up on D&D Beyond. You're going to have to go through 6 or 7 pages of bullet points and lists and pick things that you've got no idea what they mean, like encumbrance and coin weight. And then you also need to, design a character on Hero Forge or whatever else and send me the file so I can make it into a VTT. Oh, and you need to download this VTT software. And it's so overwhelming. And then once it's all done, they just have to turn up, right?
Yeah.
But there's still that real heavy amount of stuff that's got to go on.
And so much of it is not applicable immediately. Like we mentioned before we started recording, all the dice you got to roll. Like you said, they've never seen these dice before. A D8, what the hell is a D8?
Exactly.
And so here, roll these. Why? Just do it. There's a lot of that.
Exactly.
So.
Roll 4 of these 7 times and drop the lowest, and
and then add 3 each time you roll one because of your con score, and it's like what?
Yeah, exactly. It can all be a little bit heavy. So I really recommend doing character creation together as a group. Be that you're all sat around a table with character sheets in front of you and a pencil, or you're all sat on a Zoom call and you're doing and you're working your way through D&D Beyond, right?
Yeah.
Either way, however you do it, I really recommend doing it as a group. If for nothing else than just to be able to say, ignore that for now.
Yeah, and I think even with seasoned players, I think it's great to sit around the table and build your character. I mean, that's one of the most important, it's weird to say, one of the most fun to playing is creating that new character. It's fresh, nothing's happened yet. You don't know where you're going to go with it, there's that buzz and it's that energy and that vibe, and it doesn't matter how many times you've done it. Every time you build a new character, it's exciting, and just that's a great way to start this story with this group of people, just to have that excitement and just to see how you all match up together and how you're going to, and you can start thinking about things like that, like how do we flow as a party and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And that can be a relatively abstract thing, or it can be a very sort of real thing. In for instance, last time we played with John as DM for our group, we had like a mini combat encounter. So we were using Roll20 at the time, and we had our little characters there, and it was, here are your characters, and it was almost like a alternative reality, right? Like next week you won't know each other, next week we'll start fresh and we'll meet in the tavern or whatever. It was a city fair, right? I think, and
that's how we started.
Were all in the fair. But it was like, next week that will happen. But today you're all walking down the road and some bandits come out, and it was literally just to show the new players and perhaps players who are new to virtual tabletops. Here's how you move your guy. Here's how you click to roll dice on D&D Beyond. Right. Just the actual mechanics of physically what you have to do to play this game, and that can be a really great way of doing it. It doesn't necessarily have to happen in Session Zero. My most recent campaign, our Session 1, was very much, it was setting up narrative for the long ago, but then there was a bit of a sort of contrived combat encounter just so as I could show them all how Foundry VTT works and how D&D Beyond works, right?
And that is exactly what I did with my friends who we played. One of our players, it was the first time they'd ever played. And so it was, first thing is roll initiative. Let's show you how this works in the session. Granted, it was a one shot. So, but that kind of worked now as our session 0, as I now plan with that player who was totally into it, this bigger campaign now. So doing a little bit of something beforehand is probably really, during your session 0 is really good.
I think it can really set up a really good run in the future. I think the other thing you should look at talking about here with regards to mechanics are house rules. House rules being things that you as a DM particularly have changed from whichever version you're playing, or have implemented, or have just sort of tweaked a little. Now, don't go into the heavy stuff here. If it's you've changed. You roll a nat 20 on attack. We don't do 2 dice rolls for damage. We do full damage for the first roll and then a dice roll for the second and then your modifier. Like, that's not going to mean anything to new players, but more sort of overarching house rules that you might have that would make sense to people who don't necessarily know the RPG system that you're running. Things like encumbrance. Do you use encumbrance? What is encumbrance? Do you use it or not?
I don't.
I'm trying to think of other ones that I don't know. I'm trying to think of other ones that
we were talking about coins, about paying for things. Some people really like to manage their coins and use copper, silver, gold. Yeah. I like to stay just in gold, everything, whatever. Yeah. And if it's less than a gold significantly, I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, so. I'm the same, really. And then the other things I do, like magic item. If you find a magic item, you've got no idea what it is until somebody who understands magic items can tell you. But then for instance, I don't think that sounds very weird, but then I was watching on Twitch the other day a campaign a friend of mine's in, and their DM said to them, at the end of the session, you walk into the room and on the floor a hand crawls across, and we're going to leave it there. And I was like, oh, great. And he went, and those hands are crawling claws. So have a look on D&D Beyond. Look them up. They've got an AC of 12. And I'm like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, wow. I don't tell. Yeah. And just that's how, that's the flow, right? That's how he does it. And it's not wrong. It's just not how I do it, right? Huh. So I think it's really important to kind of go through a little bit of those kind of things, even if a lot of them maybe don't necessarily mean anything to your players if they are new. Right. This probably more applies if you're playing with seasoned RPG players,
who are expecting a certain rule set, and then, oh, by the way, X, Y, and Z. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it's all taken care of, and they don't have to figure it out on the fly.
Laid out early as well, because, there's some people that are going to be really, quite attached to how they do certain things, So get this stuff out early and make sure it's a discussion as well. It's not just you bawling out at your players for a while. That's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on. Style, setting, and scope, the 3 S's. These are, they all kind of roll into one, honestly, and it isn't something that you have to go into a great deal about at this point with it being session 0, but I do think it's worth talking about. What kind of world are you going to be putting your players in? What kind of world can they expect? Is this a fantasy world? Is it a sci-fi world? Are they going to all start in a cardboard box? Are they all going to start on the bow of a ship?
I want the campaign where we start in a cardboard box.
Just go for it. Yeah, the cardboard box. You open the box and outside is the abyss. What do you do? Like how are you going to start them out? Now, obviously, you don't.
We've been shipped to the abyss.
Shipped to the abyss. That's a great episode title.
Shipped to the abyss.
Write that down. But give them an idea. Is this going to be set in ancient feudal China? Is this going to be set in a Lord of the Rings style place? That kind of thing is going to directly affect the kind of character they build. So it's very important that you give them that kind of information straight on. And also the scope of the campaign can also affect how much their character build. More so with their character backstory, for instance. Is this a campaign that you are going to start and play forever? Or until there is an obvious end in a year's time, or until it fizzles out, more likely, honestly, let's be honest. Or is this going to be a 3-week thing? Is it going to be a 12-week thing? Is it going to be a 6-month thing? And this sort of thing, if you've got an idea of the answer, at least for now, it could start off with a 3-week thing and end up being fantastic and you all carry on playing. But what you as the DM expect can influence the PCs when they come up with their character backstories.
Not to mention scope in a more narrative. Are you staying in one city? For example, we're getting ready to play Eberron. First of all, that's the setting, Eberron. It's very different than a Forgotten Realms or a Ravnica. So it's very much, you need to know what the world is, and then that kind of brings in a type of gameplay. It's heavy in espionage and Pulp Fiction and intrigue and all that. So it's got that whole dynamic that some of those other settings don't have. But then scope-wise, you can have that entire campaign take place in the city of Sharn if you want to. Or you can travel all across the continent of Corvair or beyond to the different continents. And I think you need to know what you want to achieve at your session 0 so you can relay that to your players. And yeah, that might take you 30 sessions. It might take you more, or like you said, if you want to do something for 5, 6, 7 sessions, you're talking a 1 adventure, 2 adventure arc. That's totally an option too.
Exactly. And I think don't ever think less of having a more limited scope as well. I think that's really important. Like, I think a lot of new DMs, like first time DMs, want to do the whole sprawling world and their own pantheon of gods, and I've done it, I'm not saying that this isn't the way to do it, because it's exactly what I've done, but there's something to be said about kind of keeping it in. My best example of this when I talk to people is I mentioned, Dimension 20 did the Unsleeping City, which is a season set in modern day New York, but there is a magical underbelly, right?
So good.
And it's fantastic. It's really great series, really well worth watching. But if one of the characters had session 1, one of the characters was like, I get on the coach and go to Washington. Brendan as the DM will say, well, no, this is you're in New York, and the campaign is New York, and the scope is New York, right? So. And that's perfectly acceptable thing. I mean, really, obviously that wouldn't happen because
no, because they're all professional,
prepped, right?
Professional D&D players. My goodness, but also with them, it's very clear it's a production, and obviously your home games aren't, but they have 12 to 13 sessions. They know 12 to 13 sessions. That's it, and so you've got to get your story told in that long. And Brennan's actually talked a lot about that in some podcasts out there, but that's one way you can do it. One of my favorite things is I think it's a 6-episode arc from the crew who does NADPOD. I loved it. They was referred to as Hot Boy Summer. I loved that. It was only like 4 or 5 sessions, but it was so very good. So it doesn't need to be sprawling. It can be.
No, it doesn't. And there's nothing wrong with having limitations. And I personally think that, which I'm going to talk about in the next one, but I personally think that limitations are actually a good thing in some ways, because they can really breed creativity. How are you going to attack certain things if you know there is a limit to the scope or the sort of setting or style? Which perfectly leads on to the next one, which is tone. Now, I genuinely think this is the most important thing to get right and to get clear.
I didn't at first.
Zero.
I didn't. I took it for granted. I played with a group, and we just all had the same idea going in of what we wanted. And I had never played with anybody else, and then started playing with some different people, and all of a sudden it was like, oh. Or you play with a DM who has a different group that they play with, and then they DM in a different tone than you're used to playing. So by tone, I guess we mean how serious is partially is what is tone. What's the vibe?
The vibe in general, I think, and I'd be honest with you, I think you are super lucky with your Wednesday group. Like, you've just all clicked incredibly, and it's like the holy grail of D&D groups. I've had the pleasure of playing with you a few times for various one-shots.
They're great.
Just a really nice group, and they all play how I enjoy play as well, which is great. But yeah, there's all very different styles. There are D&Ds who there are DMs who all run very differently, and they can affect the tone. But also the players coming to the table can really affect the tone as well. So I think it's worth having an idea of what that tone is and pointing that out. So, for instance, I run a very humorous game. Like, I can't really imagine not playing a funny campaign. But going back to the point I just made, I find enjoyment and I find sort of I find that I get the most out of the game when the humor is encapsulated within the confinements of the setting. That sounds way heavier than it was meant to.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. You are not going out of your way to make a comedic D&D game. You enjoy the comedy that comes out of the characters acting as they should, as opposed to being slapstick or looking for one-liners.
Yeah. And I have no real problem with slapsticks and one-liners, but I would like to say that my D&D campaigns are more akin to the humor found in I don't know, a Marvel movie or something, although I don't find it particularly funny, as opposed to like a Monty Python movie where the knights are taken up by a spaceship suddenly. You know what I mean?
The original Ghostbusters, I think, like it's a comedy, but it's there's some weight to the story. I mean, it's silly, but there's something. It's not goofy. I mean, it is.
That's a really great way of doing it, and there's never that kind of now for something completely different moment where you're suddenly pulled out of the fantasy world or whatever you're playing in and something. So the best example I've got of why I think it's really important to set that tone quite early on is in one of my current campaigns. I had a player come to me with their character backstory, and they're playing an incredibly vain paladin, bleach blonde hair, fake tan, and all that. But they're playing in a relatively 101 Tolkien fantasy world, right? And I was like, that's all kind of fine, like tanning isn't really a thing, but I'm happy for your character to look like that. But then in their backstory, they'd mentioned that their character was a I don't even remember what the word was now, but they basically work for Orc Life, which is a multi-level marketing campaign that sells,
pyramid scheme.
A pyramid scheme that sells like fruit juices and stuff for weight loss, right? And it was hilarious, but it wouldn't exist in the world that I'm building. So I said to him, I was like, now listen, like that can't really be a thing. If in the game you want to try and set up a pyramid scheme within the confinements of this feudal medieval fantasy world, go for it.
What downtime activity is that?
We will totally have fun with that, but at the moment, like the way you've written it, like magazines aren't a thing, the internet isn't a thing. If within the confinements of the world you want to try and set up a Herbalife, like that's great. That could be hilarious, and I'm totally down for it. But it has to be within the physical limitations of this sort of feudal medieval world.
Absolutely.
That you're in.
You can't come out of left field like that. Or like you said, there's no I have my cell phone. You don't have cell phones. This world doesn't have cell phones.
Exactly.
It doesn't work.
But if you want to try and get some speaking stones and figure out a way of magically imbuing loads of them so that they can multi-connect across, great, you've invented cell phones in this world, but it has to work within the confinements of the world that you're in.
Or if you're setting and tone allow that kind of thing, and I do this. Oh yeah, okay. Like there, I listened to, I saw it. Where it was my sending stones work like cell phones, and they had the setting was Trinivale, and they had Trinstagram. Like they had all, and like it wasn't set, but it was a goofy, not so serious game to take a break from their much more serious game. And so that's totally within the realm, and totally you do what you at the end you do what you want, just as long as you're getting what you want. If you want to run a more serious game, but you don't tell anybody you want to run a serious game, and then people start being goofy in your game, you can't get angry at them.
It's your own fault. Yeah, exactly. And also as the game progresses, it will sort of shift and turn a little bit, like even already now, like the campaign I'm doing on a Thursday, we're only on session 4. And even now, my idea of where it's going is doing this quite quickly because of the sort of stuff that they're finding themselves interested in. They're all quite new players, so the sort of stuff that they're coming up with as responses to the world that I'm putting there for them. Yeah. So a lot of this is actually changing, and the tone is shifting a little bit, which is totally cool because it's happening organically and it's happening in a fun way as part of the group. But I still think it's very important to have an idea of what you like, the lowest that kind of you expect.
Yeah, the lowest, where's the bar? Yeah, and I think
to me and said, I want this, I'm going to run this really grim, dark awful, depressing campaign, and we're gonna do like body mutilation. You might lose an arm, you might lose an eyeball or whatever, and if that eyeball goes gangrene, you've got to. No, I'm not interested. I'm just.
God,
it's not how I enjoy the game, right?
You need to stop. I don't want to play in your games.
No, and neither would I. But if they hadn't have mentioned that, and I turned up as episode 1 playing, Falkle Madorkle, the gnome, the gnome snake oil salesman or whatever,
right.
walking in going, "Howdy, folks! Oh, come and get," it's their fault as a DM that they haven't laid that out for me, right?
Yep, and that goes back, and that actually leads into the next point. To piggyback off what we just talked about, getting player feedback. John T mentioned this earlier in the video. It's not just the DM talking at the players and saying, we're doing this, 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 and this. This is a chance for you and your party, you and your players, to get together and really hash out what you want this game to be. This is a chance to ask your players what, and new players might not know, or they might think they know, which of the 3 core pillars of D&D do they like the best: combat, exploration, and roleplay. Like you said, what is the vibe? I want to run a greedy game. You guys aren't down with that. What's something that we can all agree that we want to do? It is very, very important that we talk to our players and come to some agreement between all of us so we can all enjoy it. Otherwise, you're going to get some ill will sent your way that you didn't anticipate.
Yeah, definitely. I do think this whole thing should be a sort of two-way conversation, definitely, especially when you say like that about the sort of the pillars of the game. Which of these things do you think will interest you the most? Even if they've never played before, they might have an idea. I would argue that 99% of people will say that they are looking forward to the combat and less to the role playing, and then once they actually get into it, will start to, at least they level out and maybe prefer the role playing, honestly. But yeah, I think if you ask somebody who's never played D&D before, you're going to find very few who are like, I can't wait to turn up and pretend to be someone and put on a silly voice and but they'll be like, oh yeah, I want to smack goblins. So I think you might find that the shift is towards, if they never played before, the shift might be towards combat, and then it all starts to level out. But yeah, you might find somebody who comes to the table and like, I love the idea of figuring out the intricacies of the trade systems in this world. You're like, well, okay, cool. Wasn't ready for that, but sure, let's see what we can do there. And also be careful not to end up with a camel here as well, because this is going to be the idea that a camel is a horse made by committee, right? Like they just keep sticking bits onto it. So be careful, because you are going to have 4 or 5 people in front of you who will have very different ideas maybe of what they expect from D&D. So you're never going to please everyone. So
and the power
just try and find
the power to say no, that's hard. That's really hard. That is its own video.
At this point, the word no in Dungeons & Dragons is 100% its own video. At this point, it's perfectly acceptable to say no.
I think so.
I honestly think once you get to session 1, a DM should never say no. They can say...
You can't see my face, but my face immediately did that.
A DM can say... you can try.
You can,
but they should never
try.
I genuinely think, because once you get to session 1, there are better and more creative and more engaging ways of saying no than saying no, you can't do something. But they're saying that's once the flow is happening. At session 0, I think there's more than acceptable to put down a few ground rules and be like, no, we're not doing that. Right. I think that's perfectly fine, because you need to nip that in the bud, right, before it becomes a bigger problem 10 sessions down the line.
Right.
Is there anything can you think of that you wish you'd have said no to earlier on with any of your campaigns?
Well, the problem with me is we never actually talked a lot about it. I actually got some cojones. I actually got some guts because one of my players came to me. This is all in the pre-Session Zero. Came to me and with their backstory, and basically they did enough for 7 levels of adventuring by the time they were level 1. And I just did
So their backstory was, I'm a great adventurer who, you know,
it was
already
more
chopped the head off a dragon.
It was specifically, I have this particular thing that a level 1 adventurer would never have, and it basically unravels the fabric of the setting. And it's like, you don't have that thing. Sorry, you don't have that thing. Maybe we can get that thing at some point, but you don't have it yet.
Yeah. I've had a player come to me and be like, I'm a 2,000-year-old elf wizard who has studied my craft. Nope, you're a level 1. Mm-hmm. So you can be a 400-year-old elf who has just started to delve into magic. Right. That's fine. You're still old as hell compared to the rest of the world if that's the thing that's important to you. But yeah, this idea that you've honed your craft, no, you are your backstory. Unless you are starting the of course, you know, if you're starting the campaign at level 5, level 10, whatever. But if you are doing traditional kind of, you're all level 1s, you're all getting thrown together, or you're all getting met, you know, the whole meet in the tavern kind of thing. Your backstory should be, how have you gone from commoner stat block to level 1, whatever class?
Right, no, right? Exactly. How you went from commoner to rogue.
That's kind of the thing, really. Is give me an idea, and it doesn't really have to be specifically about class, honestly. Like, I've had backstories that don't really mention their class much. Like the Loxodon, for instance, is a fighter. There's very little in their backstory about why they're a fighter. It's more just that they are an adventurer, and a fighter is a good sort of generic class. Oh yeah, I'll go up and smack the thing, you know. Like so that's fine. It doesn't have to necessarily be about how the class came to be, but it definitely can't be this sprawling saga, you know, the Iliad before you've even sort of gone into your tavern with 8 hit points. Right.
So player feedback in moderation.
The last thing we want to talk about then are hard and soft limits. I was going to say that this is a difficult title. Apparently it's just took from Tasha's, John was saying.
We just stole it.
Just stole it from there. Yeah. The idea here is that, are there any subjects, topics, areas that you or your players don't wish to go towards or would feel uncomfortable going towards? And you know, these sort of things are really need to be put in place very early on, you know?
Yes, and it's awful to say, but we're all individuals with our own different histories, and certain things people don't want to experience for whatever reason. And something that I heard is this idea of green, yellow, red. Green topics, yellow topics, and red topics. Green topics are, I feel fine about this, no big deal. My character's comfortable, I'm comfortable, let's get it done. Yellow topics are things that make your character uncomfortable, but you can power through them. Like, you're as the player, you're like, ooh, that's a tough concept, that's a tough topic, but I'm okay with it. And then reds are just, we just don't go near them and we don't touch them. And it's important to set those out. I think it was because Tasha's had come out recently, I asked our group, let me know if there's anything that is off limits to you that you really don't want to do. Any topics that you don't want to have in the campaign. And one of the players actually did come to me privately and gave me some things that they are not comfortable playing. And that's totally cool, and I will respect that, and we won't deal with any of those things.
And when we're talking about these sort of things, we're talking about sort of like real, taboo is probably not the right word.
Dark,
but, you know, real sort of dark issues. You know, things like slavery, rape. You know, sort of, you know, real sort of issues like that. I would argue that any campaign worth its salt, at some point, will delve into some slightly sort of difficult topics. You know, like I think there's nothing wrong with look, and it's something we've certainly done in some of the sessions we've had. But I don't think there's anything wrong with approaching topics such as race within the confinements of a fantasy world. I think that's very interesting. The idea that you know, certain races are good and certain races are evil. Yes. You know, and how that is a mirror towards, you know, some of the difficulties we're currently having in
And I play. I think
that's really important.
My long-running character is a tiefling in the Sword Coast, and I specifically chose that because everyone is openly hostile towards tieflings. I was ready for that, so that would have been a totally, to me personally, agreeing. I'm all right with it, but if we're playing with someone who deals with something like that on the regular, they might be a lot more sensitive to it.
Yeah, definitely, and even maybe worse, perhaps as a PC having to watch you deal with it.
Right?
Maybe, and nothing against you, but perhaps maybe ham-fistedly. If for instance, I'm just gonna say, like, for instance, if you have a person of color in your party and you play a race that is a synonym of
right, and
black, for
look
instance.
At me.
Yeah, exactly. You ain't. You won the.
I can't. Yeah.
You won the persecution lottery, right? You're a white American male, right? I'm the same. I get one up on you because I'm British, but other than that, we're both pretty. The amount of people who've asked me to wash their laptop in coffee stores, it's ridiculous. Honestly, I'm persecuted.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Absolutely.
But
no idea.
The idea that these topics, it's not going to be just you are comfortable with it. It has to be the people around the table. We're playing a game. We're all sitting down and we're
supposed to be fun. Damn it!
We're doing make believe for a few hours a week. This is the sort of thing that you really have to think about. But like I say, saying that, I don't. I think this is a separate topic regarding voices and races, especially as from a DM's point of view. I have a lot of trouble not making every dwarf they meet a Scot. Right? It's a thing I struggle doing. As far as I'm concerned, if they walk in, suddenly the dwarf comes over and starts talking like this to them, and I can't help it. And that isn't really a terrible one, but there are other ones, for instance, that might be a bit more difficult to deal with, such as the World of Warcraft trolls, for instance, all talk with that sort of, oh, did Jojo, man, that sort of arguably racist voice now, So it's something you've got to be difficult, and it's very difficult to not make all the evil guys Russian or all the elves talk with stunning RP and all the orcs be Cockney,
right?
This is something we do have to think about, and I honestly think this is probably a whole separate topic.
I feel like we've gone more into this one particular
but the idea of race, class, just any sort of indignation at all really is something that you're going to want to bring up with people and say, is any of this out of bounds? And if it is, you deal with it or you don't play.
Absolutely.
You can't say to anybody, oh no, it'll be fine.
No, because it's not. If someone brought it to your attention, it's not fine. Mm-hmm. And nothing you do about it to try and make it fine is going to make it fine. It's probably going to make it worse.
I feel like we've ended on a little bit of a negative there. I just want to kind of reiterate that Session Zero is a really great, fun thing to do. It should be treated as the start of your play together. Hash it all out, have loads of fun coming up with stupid stuff that'll never end up being anything in the actual campaign itself,
pick a random weapon that you'll never use.
Throw a bit of stupid combat at them, give them an idea of the scale and scope, but really all the Session Zero is about is making sure that you as a team, and that's what you are when you're playing D&D, it's not the players versus the DM, you are all there to collectively storytell. That's all the D&D is. You are there to collectively role play, make sure that you're all on the same page before you start chapter 1. And I think that's all a Session Zero needs to be, really.
Absolutely. It's a chance to get on the same page. Nice.
Right, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Do all the usual YouTube stuff, click like, steal the bell, as John said in the last take.
That's what I do to my villagers in Minecraft. And do subscribe so you get more awesome info and tips and tricks for your digital and otherwise DMing experiences.
Thanks for watching. Until next time, it's time for a long rest.
Sure. Cool. I gotta stop saying cool after each one.
It'll get cut.
I know it will. That's why I even paused before I said it.
I don't mind it because it kind of lets me know that you're done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, they talk about Sardenhoft lyrics.
Sardenhoft, yes. Hard and soft limits. Hard and soft.
Wow. Can we just start all this again?
Yeah, sure.